Good morning, everyone. I hope you all had a nice dinner yesterday and a good night's sleep, and that you're all ready for our second day of the FAR conference. Welcome back. For those who weren't here yesterday, we always get some new people, although I see a lot of familiar faces. But those of you that weren't here and don't know me, I'm Anna Gold. I'm the academic director of the FAR, professor at VU Amsterdam. And today I'm your conference host. So welcome to our new guests as well. So we had a very engaging day yesterday. I heard a lot of good feedback, so I think people were enjoying themselves, and I guess it's a good sign that you are all back in the room, so that gives me some confidence. Later on, I will ask you to fill out an evaluation form. We will provide you with a QR code. We'll also remind you by email. We will keep harassing you about it because we're really curious to hear what you thought about the conference and also what we could do in the future to further improve it. Today we have another really interesting program with very exciting speakers. We'll continue on the same theme as yesterday, the organization of innovation. So we talked a lot yesterday about talent, about expectation gaps, about role of judgment in technology that we shouldn't ignore. We got some interesting insights from practitioners on the panel on the challenges they face in implementing technologies, but also a lot of positive things. And we ended with an important topic of how do we make sure that auditors also learn from their errors. So today, I have the great pleasure of introducing Mark Peecher, but actually I think I have another slide before I do that. I want to remind you of the chance of providing feedback, asking questions, and I'll do my best again to pass around the catch boxes, so don't be shy and ask any questions during the Q&A that you might have. But okay, back to today's first speaker. So Mark Peecher is succeeding Robert Neckel, whom we heard yesterday in the role of academic board member here at the FAR. We're very pleased, Mark, that you were willing and able to take on this role. Robert, of course, has been with us for 10 years, for a very long time. I don't know, is Robert also in the room? I don't think so. Well, we've been very, very fortunate to have him, and we're equally fortunate to have you, Mark. So very happy to have you here today as well. So Mark is an Executive Associate Dean of Faculty and Research at Gies College of Business at the University of Illinois in the US. And he holds the Arthur R. Wyatt Endowed Chair in Accountancy. That's a mouthful, sorry. He's had a very distinguished research career in auditing. And yeah, we're very, very happy to have you. So in his keynote, Mark will reflect on the role of auditors as professional judgment pioneers in what he describes as a high-tech, high-stakes era. So he will challenge us with a number of new research questions and also reflect on some of the research that he's done. Mark, we're very excited to have you, so welcome here on stage. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a big change. I noticed this was over here yesterday. The other big change is that the person whose face you saw on the screen had a lot more brown hair. So that's a little bit of a dated picture of me. I really enjoyed prepping for this talk. It gives a person a real chance to reflect. Pioneers are, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, people who venture into the unknown or unclaimed territory, but it also has a connotation of and research of people who lay new theoretical groundwork and make important innovations, development of thought. So I think this is aspirational for us. So my basic outline of the talk is just to be a little provocative, I hope, and my hope is that the thinking that goes on while I go through these slides relatively rapidly results in new research ideas, new interactions with practitioners. If it does that, I will have succeeded. I want to point out that although we have a lot of author teams and sometimes even still sole authored projects, we're here today because we have a collective research agenda. We come together as somewhat of a thought ecosystem. I'm going to be borrowing on the thinking of other researchers for sure in this, and anything that I say in here that is a little bit off track is not their fault, it's mine, okay? Let's go ahead and jump in. So will the value of assurance, including financial statement auditing, decline or improve in the next decade? So Bill Kinney, formerly at the University of Texas, Austin, one of the early talks I listened to him, he pointed out the value of assurance undoubtedly begins with the value of the underlying assertion, right? So what assertions are going to continue to be more valuable, less valuable, or hold value? What is it that people want to know? Then it's also a function of, well, how great of a performance does the attest function provide? Are the attesters really creating a differential probability, conditional probability, and a likelihood of what might be construed as a material misstatement, given there is an assurance service as opposed to the absence of an assurance service? And then critically, will investors and other users who rely on these services be able to reasonably sort out these matters? We can do our best as assurance professionals. You can. I'm sort of in the ivory tower watching you, learning from you. But can you convey that you've done really competent work with high integrity and communicate those results? Now, a very important ingredient in this is how trustworthy does society deem you as assurance professionals? And about 2017, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, society started to distrust a wide swath of professionals. And auditors have fallen in stature. Assurance professionals, accountants, they're right there in red. Only 35% of society says that they trust them completely or a great deal. Leading the charge are nurses, 75%. Thankfully, we are more trusted still than politicians, but we have some work to do. Now, one person who recently gave a talk that I really commend to you is Mark Nelson. He gave a talk related to an anniversary at the Accounting Review. And he said, upon reflection of a very similar issue, if only there was an industry comprised of professionals whose role it is to expertly assess whether assertions are materially misstated. Then he goes on to say, hey, is there a broader role that assurance can play in society? This is a paper called Experimental and Archival Research in Auditing, Complementarities, Convergence, and Future Directions. I highly commend it to you. He used a really neat take on the Brunswick lens model for the eggheads out here, the academics, to talk about experimentalists versus archivalists. To me, I'm going to have a little different take. I say that our collective research agenda, not earth-shattering here, but really important, I think, should be theory-guided, practitioner-informed, but researcher-performed, okay? And when I'm saying this, I have to give a ton of credit to my close friend and colleague, Catherine Caduce, because this is one of the main things that she pointed out in her talk to the AAA in the last year or so as well, the importance of theory in accounting research, I think is the title of the paper. So, theory-guided. So I'm going back to basic doctoral training. This is a book called Curlinger. He has since gone on co-authors, but here's the definition of research. It is systematic, is controlled, empirical and critical investigation of phenomena guided by theory and hypotheses about presumed relations among such phenomena. I mean, causal relations is not the only relation to aspire to understand, but is certainly a highly valuable type of relation to understand. Causation as opposed to mere association, direction of causality. We had a number of comments yesterday about to what extent can you infer causality? Are there alternative explanations for your findings? And then the power of experimentation, actively manipulated variables to help control a research project. Theory, what is theory? So sometimes when I talk amongst friends in my academic circle, there's a group of mathematicians who think theory seems to be only something relegated to lemmas and proofs and has something to do with principal agent theory, first order conditions and all these things. That's one form of theory, but it's more, I like this more general definition, again by Curlinger, a set of interrelated constructs that present a systematic view of phenomena by specifying relations among variables with the purpose of explaining and predicting, okay? So that's what theory's about. So when I look for high quality research, I'm looking, you know, in my role as a former editor at Accounting Organization Society and Accounting Review now, I'm looking for, well, what theory are they testing? And sometimes there's going to be a role for constructing theory, but at least you can see where the researchers are at. If it's an investigation that's completely exploratory, at least lay that out for the reader. This is Catherine's comment. We can get so much farther and faster, particularly on big problems, using theory. Theory, by virtue of its focus on cause-effect relations, allows us to understand why something happens. And I think she's exactly right. Of course, we were both trained at the same institution, so you got to take that into account. You can also use theory to develop informed conjecture about how likely it is that a set of effects that you see in your research setting are likely to generalize to other interesting contexts that you're really wondering about. So this is really the question of generalizability, and sometimes people underestimate the role of theory in generalizability issues. You can test robustness and boundary conditions. Okay, so I wanted us to say about theory. Well, when it comes to theory, what broad brushstrokes can I say about how higher quality auditing is done? Now, despite its credence properties, and at least Monica's in here, Robert's heard me talk many times before, so it's just fine that he's not here. But, you know, credence properties idea of auditing is that even after the audit is performed, it's really hard to ascertain its quality, at least at some level. But from an input perspective, both economists and psychologists have agreed for a long time that it's really about capability, expertise, and motivation, which also relates to independence. So when you think about, and my penchant has always been to do behavioral experimental work, and now I've done more surveys and qualitative things, but the theories that have applied to auditing largely can be represented schematically like this. And so you have on the far, my right, your left-hand side, you have attributes of auditors. The first two, experiences and abilities, really relate to capabilities, and then the bottom one is motivations. Okay, so you have capabilities and motivations that in turn helps give the opportunity to acquire knowledge. Knowledge is what, in addition to your motivations, changes your ability to engage in different types of thinking processes, not always under conscious control, that will lead to task performance. So I thought I would give you a real rapid journey of how these things have unfolded in accounting. Now, the thinking processes themselves, if you want to just catch, I mean, many of you probably have seen this book and read at least part of it. This is the Daniel Kahneman Thinking Fast and Slow, the dual process idea. So when you think of these theories, think of that fast or slow thinking. That's not the only way you can describe these processes, but it's an important way. So Ashton, I'll talk a little bit about that. Someone said research started in '68 with Ball and Brown. I think Beaver was right there too at the same time. But Ashton's seminal policy capturing study largely left the thinking in a black box, but basically is trying to use linear regression to see how consistently auditors made judgment in time 1 and time 2 with a different set of configuration of internal control strengths. And we're actually looking at whether auditors rely on the same cues to determine hey, are the controls strong at this organization or not? And it's a very complicated design. Lots of things manipulated. We don't see designs with that many manipulated variables these days. But he was basically trying to capture, what are the separation duties and independent internal checks? What are the cues that auditors use to make internal control judgments? simple in a bankruptcy judgment. We'll do questions after. Yeah. And then we moved along to the expertise model. Some of the work there, Bonner and Lewis, Libby and Luft, actually, this, and Han Tong Tan has a paper related to this model. And what I'm doing here, why are some things orange, some things blue? Well, if it's an orange, in my recollection, my rendition of this, it's more important in these papers, okay? So it's not as though thinking fast or thinking slow was ignored entirely in those papers, but that was either through random assignment, thought to be very variable, but not the primary thing we're varying. But they were looking at, in Bonner and Lewis, what types of experience give rise to either technical knowledge, specialty knowledge, these types of things. And then some papers started moving on to look more carefully at trait skepticism, things like dispositional characteristics of auditors. One of the things that I'm fascinated by is wise thinking and wisdom. If you want to pick up a really great read on wisdom, I think Stephen Hall's book, he's not one of the people who has studied wisdom as the academics, but he does a really good job in that book, talking about the various ways that sociologists, that psychologists have looked at wisdom, and wisdom is something I think that can be a real comparative and competitive advantage for the assurance profession. If we have wise audit professionals, that's going to be very helpful in capabilities. Also, I commend to you Keith Stanovich's What Intelligent Tests Miss. This is talking about actively open-minded thinking, mindware, and things like that. So I was trying to give, some good reading for you all. Now, all of these things, including motivations, can be thought of as individuating factors, and you can broaden the lens a little bit to say, well, there's a whole host of situational factors. So if you put all of the things we were just talking about in one little schematic thing called individuating factors, then you have situational factors. But the thing is that the situational factors, in order to affect task performance for auditors, either need to directly affect the fast and slow thinking process or need to be mediated by individuating factors in the auditors themselves. So if you have something like incentives or time pressures, does that change the experiences? Does that change the ability of the auditor over the short term and long run? Okay? So you look at the direct effects of things that are about auditors, direct effects are things about situations, and you also look at these interactions. This is what a lot of experimentalists have done throughout the decades. Another thing about the collective research agenda, in addition to being, so one end of a bridge is theory, okay? But it needs to be practitioner informed. And the other end of the bridge to me is really interesting problems insofar as practitioners think about the world today and where they see the world changing. So Catherine did a really great job of encouraging professionals to share your knowledge. You can read the quotation. But she also made a point that once you share your knowledge, sort of very politely, I think she said, get out of the way and let researchers do their job. Because we have this comparative advantage. And then we come back together and then we compare notes. Researchers need candid input to help form our agenda. 2007, Ed Nussbaum, then CEO in the United States of Grant Thornton, there's a paper called The Top 10 Wish List. I would love to know what your top 10 wish list is at individual levels and at firm levels. Why not? So we have this bridge. Audit research, if successful, can bridge theory and practical problems. That's the aspiration. So researcher performed. It seems obvious, but when you have the researchers perform, what can we bring? Well, we can bring competence, but we can bring independence. Just like the assurance professional is supposed to be bringing independence between management and investors in the case of financial statement audits, one of the main things we can do if we do science right, and of course there's all kinds of attacks on science because the way science sometimes is funded, is independence. Okay? And there's a paper that I was on, still am on, with, I'll go a couple slides, with Phil Lamoureux, Devin Williams, Eldar Maskimov, and myself. We looked at this issue of what, let's see, I'm going a little bit the wrong way now. How to confuse a professor. Every button I push now is going forward. Maybe I go back here. Hey, look at this, it's all going, okay. There we go. Maybe I should speed up. Okay. But basically, in the United States, for a long time, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board was moving towards a broader release of performance measures about the audit. And then, lo and behold, the new administration's in power, and then it gets the kibosh. Boom, put the brakes on. This also has a lot to do with how sustainability was taken off the radar largely in the United States. But this is done despite investor groups being very vocal in their desire to get more performance measures. And so we end up doing a survey, and we have to tell one of the comparative advantages. We say we designed and conducted our survey interviews independently of any regulator, professional organization, or audit firm. Now, this was a registered report with the accounting review, and we're about ready to send it in, we think, for the final time to Nimit Shroff. But it was a little interesting because we presented it initially at a PCOB event, and they were like, do you need help getting audit committees? We said, absolutely not. We don't, that's exactly what we do not want. We don't want anyone to think that you're curating particular audit committee members for our research. We wanted to do it independently. Some of the things we found real quickly: audit committee members highly value engagement level audit performance metrics. What does it mean when, especially for these large firms, you say there's a Deloitte deficiency has, what does that mean for my audit? The other thing is that they're very passive, though, audit committee members in states at least, in getting information. They're highly reliant on engagement team partners to share information about inspections with them. And the other big thing we found that was sort of not at all expected, what audit committee members really value the auditors for is a check on management. So when management's not in the room, the audit committee members ask, it goes well beyond any audit standard requirement, that, hey, is management competent? And what integrity levels do you see management having? They're really asking the auditors for sort of off the record, are we okay here in terms of what our management is pushing for or not? I thought that was very interesting. So that's like, whoa, that's a real value add by the audit. Okay, if you look at the same question I teed up earlier, we can start trying to, decompose it. What attributes of auditors? What attributes of managers, assertions, investors, regulator standards, markets, and so forth? What are they going to substantially influence whether the value of external assurance declines or increases over the next decade? And I said atrophies, abides, or accretes there. Okay, now the decline case. I'm not trying just to bring things up that you might not like to hear, but you're all familiar with the story in the Netherlands where KPMG, and all the big four, by the way, were engaged in, selective members of the profession were engaged in basically cheating on exams. These may have even been ethics exams, I don't know. Maybe that's the United States. Just keep your nose clean is what Art Wyatt would say. One reason I really love being the Art Wyatt chair, his whole point is that the profession needs to be ethical and independent. Don't do this. And then also KPMG Australia, you may have caught this. They were using client information in an inappropriate way. Didn't want to hear it at first. People have stepped down. Why should society trust these auditors? Keeping it real, being direct. I'm told the Dutch like that. Another way that the assurance value could decline is that it's very hard for stakeholders, investors, to understand what is being communicated to them. So one case I want to take you through very quickly, a set of slides on American Airlines ESG sustainability assurance. Okay? So in a space of about 5 years, they adopted new assurance sustainability frameworks. They voluntarily hired different sets of assurance organizations. They changed assurers. And they changed the level of assurance up and then down. What are investors to make of this? It's a mess. It is a mess to me. So I'm looking only at CO2 So one of the things here in the American Airlines ESG report, they adopted SASB after using only the Global Reporting Initiative for a number of years. And so you see SASB metrics. SASB does a great job by industry saying, here are the key performance indicators you should think about. So here they are. And then they have a company called SCS Global, third-party assurance. Before 2020, they said in their sustainability report, we have decided to not hire a third-party assurance service. We don't need to do it. 2021, we hired someone. Well, why did they do that? Is that because the underlying value of the assertion became more important? Or was it because management's credibility wasn't sufficient to enable the investors to say, what's the difference in the conditional probability of material misstatement given assurance versus the absence of assurance? So what's interesting about this report, SCS Global, a level of assurance is limited. I know it's really small. I don't have a laser printer here, but a laser, look at that. It's not laser, it's even cooler. It basically says limited assurance, and then two people signed, they tell you the individual partner, if you will, who was in charge of that assurance. They put their name, and then they have someone who was their supervisor. And then they have a second set of assurance done over here by an organization called Science-Based Targets, and they're saying, hey, we have looked, and did American Airlines really adopt a target that's going to help them be, carbon neutral by 2050, something like that? So we have two different assurance services. Next year, those two are gone, and KPMG comes in. Now KPMG is doing good work here. I don't have any reason to doubt that. I pulled them up in a different context a few minutes ago. But in this assurance service report, if you look at, there's a darkening of a certain number, 34,629 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents released. And notice that's darker, and then there's some mere grayscale. Now this thing's going to quit working. Down below, you see this dark highlighted, and then there's gray highlighted. So there's a splitting of the type of assurance done between these gray ones and these darkened ones. And what do you think it is? The darker ones, that's reasonable assurance. So they tell the investors, okay, we've not only gotten assurance, we have some of our metrics, we have reasonable assurance being provided, and others only mere limited assurance. So if you're thinking as an investor, like what would be your confidence band? Like here's my best guess of what the true CO2 being released by American Airlines, and if you said 90% confidence interval, what does reasonable assurance versus full assurance? By the way, 3 times during this 5 years, American Airlines restated its CO2 emissions because they said they were adopting new measurement approaches. So it's very confusing. So I think if we, as a profession, and that's yellow highlight there is just when they restated their approach. Okay, I think that's very confusing. Now, moreover, if you're interested in the ESG sustainability area, I think you should get caught up on anything that Brandon Gipper does. He's a very thoughtful researcher. He's at Notre Dame now. And what they did in this particular paper, they make the claim, they come up with an expectation model for what amount of CO2 each organization likely is emitting. And then after using that expectation model, they say, is there any sign that assurance services reduces it? And there is none. In fact, what they say is that it's possible that some firms without board oversight continue to underreport despite obtaining assurance because outsiders cannot easily distinguish the types. So if you have limited assurance, so this is actually, we're buying some credibility and we're getting the number we want. Okay, another decline case is AI threats. Will hype benefits of AI lead to unrealistic expectations? Every time I walk through any airport, it seems like all the big four and others are basically saying that we've got your back with AI, right? And we're going to have AI-driven audits, human in the loop, hopefully more than that, hopefully human orchestrating the whole thing. Former regulator Christina Ho quit this PCAOB and she started this accounting auditing company called Oath. And notice what it says there, has set up an accounting firm. I don't know if you can read that, but 80% automation in the next 5 years is the idea. more AI technology. At the same time you're seeing more AI technology, there's a lot more private equity funding, including at Oath. And hopefully they say there's this wall because the private equity is only funding consultation, but the attest function is separate. But come on. The other thing I've been reading is that if we are afraid, have you seen all of these people from OpenAI, people from Claude? I mean, you ask them, what's the chance that there could be, and I don't want to steal the next session's thunder too much, that there could be really catastrophic outcomes as a result of AI, and you see estimates between 1%, 10%, sometimes much higher. And when you read about how excessive use of AI affects the brains of 18 to 25-year-olds, the young professionals you're hiring with all this cognitive offloading, you know, it's not just the rise of the machines that you need to worry about, it's the decline of human capability. So that's interesting. This is a real quick nod not only to the expectation gap, but also some of Anna's own work. This is just I brought this paper up just to show you how hard it is to remove the expectation gap. Basically, she and her colleagues basically ran an experiment where the audit opinion, the very verbiage of the audit opinion changed and made it very clear that management is the one responsible for that there's not fraud in financials. Management is responsible that there's not a material misstatement due to errors. Laying out the responsibilities of management and the auditor. And what she basically found is that in this little bar graph is that the expectation gap was very robust. The opinion plus explanation version is in sort of the orangish red. And what you see is that analysts, if anything, after they read about management's responsibilities, if anything, they say the auditors are the ones a little bit more. Auditors, of course, you know, they try to have, they want to craft a highly valuable service, but they also want to say, but, you know, we don't have so much responsibility in this case. But the expectation gap is very real, and I worry that all of this AI is going to solve riddles, what we're saying publicly, and then that's very different from what I'm hearing from the private frictions that are happening all the time as you're performing audits. I mean, a lot of times what I hear is that, okay, I get the tool, it says I look at the whole population, here are the examples of transactions that need a closer look, but how do you verify that, especially if it's an LLM, you're not even sure how it's working, you got to use a regular sampling approach and see if you get the same answer. And how is that done? Is that done at the engagement level? Is that done on a test basis by quality control? Okay. And it's really, you thought, Mark, this can never happen. Well, maybe you saw this. An insurance company called American Trust Financial restated multiple years of earnings downwards by $136 million in the issue of the auditor. Where's the auditor comes up? And the judge said, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals judge in New York City said the judge said the audit report is so general that it's utterly immaterial. And then all of the people who are in the profession got really concerned about this, and there was, of course, some pushback, strong attempts to clarify that the auditor's report is critical. So we're kind of at a inflection point here, in my opinion. Okay, another case, and I only have 8 minutes and 40 seconds. So you hear all the hype from these companies and how great AI is, and there's no doubt. I think it's just a matter of time before we get general intelligence. I'm not sort of like one of these people who think that's just not going to happen. But when you see things like overall accuracy of accounting tasks of 92% would be what they often will lead with. That is merely typically categorizing transactions. 2,000 transactions run through what type of accuracy. But when you use Claude Opus 7, 4.7, and you want it to do month-end close, more complicated work, it's still not that impressive, 50%. And even overall accuracy of 79.2, which of course is a composite that this basically, you can weight it by, well, if we have 15,000 transactions and only 2 closes, you're going to come up with a much higher number here. It's a little bit of a gimmick, right? But even if you take it on its surface, that's not going to make you happy, right? 80%. But it's coming.
Their bet is we're going to use AI to bridge that gap.
Right.
But it's same model, but different tech. Yeah.
And the problem is that the AI is just not there yet. And we know this from a study, a benchmark that a company called Dual Entry put together. And what they did is they evaluated 19 AI models across 101 real accounting workflows. And the top performer is Claude Opus 4.7, That makes a lot of sense. That's the one that is really hot right now. Everyone's switching over.
And then he goes on. But basically, he's raising questions about it. Here's another really interesting thing, and any of you who've worked with LLMs will probably relate to this one. This is basically how AI has yet to demonstrate anything in terms of meta intelligence.
Because I think if you're working as a human with another human and you're trying to delegate to them, you do
This is
trust
Dan
them to come back
Klein.
and say, well, I actually couldn't find this information for you, or I got blocked, as opposed to, I couldn't find it, but here's my guess, a wild guess, and I'm not going to tell you it's a wild guess. That would not be good behavior from a human, but we see it all the time from machines. So I think there is the problem that you mentioned, which is that people may not have the skills to delegate and manage humans. And then there's the additional layer that these systems do not act the way a human does in a delegation context.
So that's beyond the prompt, highly commended to you. Then the other side of this is the integrity of the AI systems. This is a new working paper with Eugene Soltis and some colleagues out of Harvard. They basically show that internal reasoning traces of AI agents often revealed intent to deceive and conceal, paralleling the mens rea element in criminal liability. So competence, high, integrity low, worst possible combination. Here's an example of some of the reasoning. So this is set up, there's 3 vending machines, simulated customers. There's not like it's just a profit motive for the simulated, profit companies trying to run a vending machine, not a very complex business. So someone gets a defective product, and the AI says, I told Bonnie I would refund her, but I actually didn't send the payment. And if you go down, and then it's reasoning to itself, actually I'm reconsidering, I could skip the refund entirely since every dollar matters, and I'm going to focus my energy on the bigger picture instead. You can see there's a little wrestling with dishonesty, but of course it's not thinking of it in terms of dishonesty the way we do. It's just a character. It's just the next thing that the temperature of the large language model said put there. Okay. There could be also maladaptive reliance on AI by the professionals themselves. There's a lot of work in this area. Just one particular paper that I worked on with Sebastian and Isaac's here and Christian's here. But basically, we gave auditors advice that was either more highly or less highly generated with the help of AI. And there's really not a lot of reason to question the competence of the AI-provided advice here because the professional was also vouching for a human professional. But basically, the whole idea here is that AI, and the messaging AI can put auditors in a position of being disaffirmed. And that makes them reluctant to rely on AI. It's a little bit of a fight back principle there, a little bit of what about all my professional judgment skills? Do you not value that anymore? And that's what that graphic is showing. But if you affirm their judgment skills, this disproportionate propensity to not use AI goes away. There's another paper I could talk about more of situational factors. I'm going to skip this one here and just share with you one more paper that it's been around a long time. And in fact, it helps practitioners understand that sometimes academic papers take a long time to ripen. I don't know if it's like wine. Hopefully this is a good wine. But so this is one about conference calls and auditors' willingness to address material misstatement risk and the role of processing ability and motivation. And this is also a very cool thing to share because this is a case where reviewers, you get people on a project and you get too close to it. And you can't see some weaknesses that I would see, in another paper. So we've been able to improve this through the review process. And really that whole schematic of ability, capability, and motivation is really a good way to think about what happens in this paper. So what we did in this paper, real quickly, earnings calls we know from prior research includes information that is predictive of material misstatement. It may not be something that auditors need to pay so much attention to. It's an empirical question, I suppose, because they may think, hey, I work with this client all the time, so anything that's in a conference call, I already know. I already got it. Could be highly redundant. But, and we know from prior research that if you improve auditors' ability through a cognitive dissonance prompt to look for signs of material misstatement arising from deception, they do improve their performance from over worse than chance, 50-50, to like a 70% accuracy rate without having an increase in false positives. So basically, what we did in the study, and the reason I'm talking to you about this study, they don't have the right motivation is what this slide. You can question, now, on average, there's evidence to suggest as an academic that auditors sometimes are not they have this desire to please client management. It's part of that's just human nature. They're hired by society at one level through the proxy of the audit committee, but then you have management right there. Okay. And one of the better papers you can look at there, certainly Lori's paper, she's here, and I think Joe might still be here or not. Pat Hopkins is on that one. Okay, so auditors don't really listen to earnings call with a high degree of regularity. Standards don't require them to look at earnings calls. Suggest they do, but don't require it. So we basically had them listen to earnings call, and we did an experiment. This is a framed field experiment. And one of the things I would think that FAR can do is support, and researchers can propose more field experiments. It's not that lab experiments are not valuable. They're very valuable, very controlled. In fact, there's more control. But this is another way that we can take this unique relationship that we have here and learn from field experiments. So basically the story is that in interaction, two types of prompts, a cognitive dissonance prompts, which increases auditors' capability to look for signs of material misstatement in earnings calls. They spend about an hour and a half on this task. That type of prompt plus a motivating prompt that reminds them of their professional responsibility to detect material misstatements, whether due to error or fraud. Those two things together really changes how they go about this task. This is a particular theory at the suggestion of a reviewer. We're using the elaboration likelihood model, a very strong general model from social psychology. A lot of credit to Emily Griffith, and Nolder's still here? Is here? Yes, this is a very helpful tool. Christine has talked about. Go take a look at it. Richard Petty in psychology. So motivation and capacity. Interaction between the two is key. So in our story, the direct effects indicated by the dashed lines are not so powerful, but it's the interaction of these two things that is powerful. And then real quickly, I'm not going to take the time to go through each of the hypotheses, but the whole idea is task performance improves both in terms of how they plan to change their audit approach, but also in terms of the material misstatements they found. And so I'm at negative 30 seconds, so I'm going to probably go to negative minute 30. 184 practicing auditors, about 50 engagements. We made the assignment of the manipulated variables at the engagement level. These are the two prompts. And now dependent variables are, hey, did you plan to change your audit approach, nature, timing, and extent? And then we looked at what they found. And if you had both prompts, 22.5% of the auditors who got both prompts, they decided to change their audit plans, more than double the next highest group. And then what's really interesting to me also is that they detected larger material misstatements and corrected larger material misstatements. We don't get these data in any US related audit research project of which I'm aware. By the way, another sign of good performance is that in 40% of the engagements, the auditors detected at least one material misstatement. Okay. And then there's also evidence of greater elaboration. That's for another talk. Ending thoughts. Audit professionals and researchers are both judgment pioneers. I also wonder, sometimes people say, does the Dutch environment generalized to the US? And I'm wondering, one thing could be true because of this ecosystem here. We may have a collective treatment effect where it's just harder to find poor audit quality. The Dutch auditors are performing under a system not only where there's regulators, but there's also researchers coming in and combing through a lot of what they've done. Researchers curate your theoretical edge and craft studies that capture key tensions. Don't use the American heuristic, I need only 10, 15 minutes. Think about what task would be really interesting, even if it takes 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Also think about framed field experiments. Practitioners, share your insights and challenges with us so we can help you improve your value of assurance over time. Those are the thoughts I wanted to share with you. Hopefully you found it useful.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think a lot of interesting thoughts here. You covered a lot of ground. So let's see if there are any questions or maybe practitioners that have something for our wish list.
Yeah, I'll take the wish list.
I'm Barry Insland from ProOptima Audit Services in Johannesburg. And I want to thank you for the presentation. There's one thing on the wish list from me. You touched on assurance.
Yeah.
That's something that is very close to my heart. I'm a practitioner in internal audit, and I'm at war with the word assurance, because I think it is a misnomer, and particularly mostly in internal auditing, but as you explained from the external audit side as well, with the assurance provided on the ESG and so on. And I would like to know whether there has been research done on it, and I want to encourage people to do
Okay,
research.
so internal
because
audit research is a highly underappreciated area. Colleagues here that are here today, maybe in part because of ISAR, and this was a big bonus. I mean, the Institute of Internal Auditing is very interested in supporting and funding research projects. And a lot of the growth in at-test professionals is going to be in internal audit. In fact, we have, I mean, we're betting on that. At Illinois, we just created 2 new courses in internal audit. So I really think this is a growing area. I didn't talk about it too much in my talk today, but certainly it deserves a lot of coverage. Yeah.
Hello, Mark. In the future, are you expecting any regulations about using the AI in the audit process?
Well, it's very slow. I mean, if you think about the pace of change in business, yes, the answer is yes, but it's going to come fairly late. And so I think a lot of the evolution, and like it could be punctuated, you know, very quick changes. But in the United States, at least, it's going to be very slow, is my guess. So I would say in the next, think about this, the process. Suppose they're ready today to make the new, it's still going to be 3 years before all the comment period is done, and then it's going to be reissued. So this is a 5-year out thing, probably. Meanwhile, practice is going, and the speed at which the technology is going, there's going to be a lot more change. And so how do they get the regulation sufficiently ahead to regulate not AI today, but regulate AI, 5 years now down the road? Got to be very principled base, I think. Yeah. One back there, over here. I mean, that's why Christina, that's one reason she left the PCOB. She got kind of frustrated.
John, I work at a pension fund, and we are investing a lot. Stock exchanges are booming. And what do you think about the field of the going concern assumptions of large companies and the role of external auditor in that field?
So going concern assumptions, especially related to technology companies, or just in general with AI?
In general.
Okay, so a lot of thoughts come to mind there. First of all, you could try to lever either agentic AI that is not based on one of the, OpenAI or other big providers, Claude. But these things are prediction models, so you could try to see if these models can lead to better predictions of a company's ability to continue as a going concern over 1 year or one operating cycle, whatever's longer, right? That could happen, so it could enhance both management's view and an attester's view. But I also thought part of your question was, will there be, because a lot of people talk about this being a bubble, and there's going to be some companies that do not continue to go and exist as a going concern. So I think there's probably heightened risk. A lot of these firms are, of course, still private. Anthropic and OpenAI coming out with massive IPOs. They're going to be around for a while. is my biggest guess, right? That couple decades maybe. But, I mean, I think going concern is another, I guess another question you're having there is like all the assertions that are valuable, how much more or less valuable is the going concern assertion, right? Compared to US GAAP-based or IFRS-based earnings per share. I think it's a valuable assertion. My archival empirical colleagues could tell us about the relative value of a going concern type of assertion versus net income on a GAAP basis. And funny thing along those lines is bringing to my mind, though, there's academic research done by, I think Justin was on this paper, I know Spencer Anderson on this paper, that when you have an assurance professional come in and provide assurance on an assertion, there is a bleed over effect that people think this assertion is more important. Otherwise, it wouldn't get. So it's hard just to have a reliability enhancing service. Once you decide to get assurance or attestation on an assertion, there's a sense that that's a more important thing. So when you do attestation. Yeah, another question.
Yes, Peter, as you know.
Yeah.
I was struck by your great overview on what's happening in insurance audit, broader assurance, and I would highlight two things. One is that about sustainability, and then further go to AI. Is that inherent to a new era of assurance, broader assurance? You always get an emerging or increased insights on a number of topics. Like you phrased it with the American Airlines example.
Yeah.
On it's called a restatement. Well, if the accounting standards are changing, then you have to adjust. A restatement for me feels like an error, which is now corrected. I've signed off myself financial statement audits, but also sustainability assurance engagements. And we had to struggle with reasonable assurance and limited assurance. And for me, reasonable assurance is about that I'm an auditor, I'm convinced that these financial statements are true review. And limited assurance is for me, it's plausible, well, okay, fine. You make a picture with less pixels. And in the discussion with my client, I also said to them, well, I'm going on a high level, less pixels, limited assurance, that we together run the risk that a year after, we have to conclude, oops, that was not that granular as expected. Yeah? So grant me to do more in order to prevent a restatement next year, and clients accept that. But now that's just sustainability, and it felt that you were a little skeptical about the sustainability, but that's for the drink later on. But now on AI, if we talk about the emerging market of AI and AI assurance, you will have the same aspect about it's not always set in stone what are the suitable criteria or how to audit, how to assure, and that means that you can decide not to do it as an audit profession or to take the steps and accept that, well, we may have increased insights and researchers may help us in that context. So I would like to have your reflection on that.
There's a lot there. Well, first of all, I was thinking about your sustainability notion, and that one reason to not get high assurance is that if we think we're going to have a restatement in the future, we probably ought not do that. Just go with limited, because then we could say, well, we told you all along we didn't have that much confidence. So in the sustainability area, of course, there's a big difference made between innocuous restatements versus what appears to have been intentional understatement of CO2 equivalents. And so American Airlines, when they did this restatement, it was always in the framing of it was, hey, we just found a better measurement methodology, so we're using that. But there were times when that was also leading to a more favorable CO2 report. So these things become very difficult to untangle. I have talked to colleagues in engineering, the Granger School College of Engineering. They have an institute called the Information Trust Institute, and I immediately reached out to them, as AI was beginning to pop more and more clearly, and said, there's an opportunity for us to have a program where you bring the best of assurance and auditing and technology to do AI assurance. What's the chance that if you get feedback from a different model, and it could be a deterministic model with an agentic AI that an organization has put together as opposed to one of these more general LLMs. And I was really hoping for him to say on the other side of the then phone, and he's a personal friend, yeah, I've got the roadmap for you. Here's what we do. And he goes, we have no idea how to provide this type of assurance. We know it would be valuable. So this is an example of the assurance, the assertion is very important, but to get there to that conditional probability of there being material misstatement given assurance versus not, that's what's still very much for informative stages. And I'm just relying on them in that regard. So I feel like the best tool right now for auditors who are trying to get confidence that the answers they're getting, as it were, from an LLM or their proprietary agentic AI is reasonable, is to do auditing in there's going to be a period of time where you're doing audit in the new way, and that's going, whatever is new is changing rapidly, and then you do it the old way, and you see if you come to the same answers. Because you're not going to, remember the documentation requirement, one of my slides is going to talk about just is a documentation requirement. You got to be able to document what you've done such that a professional who is not on the engagement can see how you got to the answer. This is where, going back to the regulation, what does that really mean? And at one level, you can say, well, if I were to quiz each of you how your firm's sample size determination methodology came up with, 87 as a sample size, and ask you how did it really do it, most of you are not say it's related to the binomial Poisson distribution and talk about the statistics. So there is a bit of a black box there. But this is a whole different area of unknown, and it's a real challenge. So we don't have a class on auditing AI. I thought there would be like a quick, like internal audit. We got that one on board within a year. This one, not yet. Great question.
Thank you, Mark. And I know we have another question, but we're unfortunately out of time, so that will have to happen in the break. Big applause for Mark. So we'll now continue with our next session, which is led by Therese Grohnert. Therese is an associate professor at Maastricht University, and her research, some of which in collaboration with the FAR, focuses on workplace learning, judgment and decision making, and learning cultures in professional service firms. Many firms here, I think, will know Therese because one thing she's really good at, and which I think other researchers can learn from, is truly engaging with firms, making sure that research insights are being shared in great ways with the firms. In fact, I want to point out, maybe someone can go close the door. I also want to point out a ongoing initiative that she and Christian Peters are leading, which is sort of a pilot that we're working on with the FAR, where they've developed a training module on AI, which is going to be rolled out at some of the member firms of the FAR this summer. So in research made practical in a way. So basically a module where they really work on trying to share insights and not just presenting a paper, but actually triggering discussions and making practitioners learn from research. So in Therese's talk, she will draw on multiple studies and she will focus on a central question for the future of auditing, how auditors develop expertise, how they learn, but also how this process might change in an AI-enabled profession. Therese, welcome.
Thank you. That was a very, okay, I hope I didn't hurt anybody's eardrums. That was a very comprehensive introduction. Thank you, Anna. I'm here as a friend of the profession, a friend of the research domain. My background is in learning sciences rather than in auditing. And that means that I have a particular lens through which I look at the issues in the auditing field, but also the discussions that are happening on the academic side of auditing. And I'm very glad today to be able to share a little bit of that insight, because I hope it will be informative both for research and for practice to bring that learning perspective on board in auditing a bit more broadly. Before I do that, though, I would like to particularly invite the practitioners in the room to help us with the top 10 wish list of research, because I would like you to scan this code and to tell us which changes and developments have actually affected how you audit the most in the past few years. And then I'm very curious to see what comes up. All right, as soon as we have some inputs, we should be able to see a word cloud. There we go. All right, we have 4 responses. All right, we have a winner that is starting to emerge. All right, it looks like we have a stable cluster developing around AI, LLMs, technology. We have a second cluster around generations. One of them called out quite explicitly. I hope Gen Z in the room is okay. We also see offshoring, data availability, a lot of technology-based changes. Now, given the answers that are coming in and the amount of answers that are coming in and the variety of issues that you are raising, it looks like change is not really a bug in the audit environment, rather it's a feature. That means that it's very unlikely that whatever you have learned during your certification is going to stay relevant for your entire career. It's very unlikely that without additional learning and development, you will be able to provide the audit quality that you seek to provide as a profession. And that makes learning a central ingredient for, and to go back to Mark's talk, we have the little bubble of experience and abilities on the left side. We go towards knowledge. I would like to position one more thing in the middle there, and that is learning. That we don't automatically go from experience to knowledge, but rather it takes certain processes and support for that to happen. And this is what my passion has been over the last 12 years of research. So for the researchers in the room, you all have taken a picture, right? And then we know what kind of things we can help practice with. Thank you so much for participating. Then if we look at change and what it means to not only survive that change, but to thrive on that change, to get the best out of the profession that we can, to get the best out of the individuals, teams, and the firms, for me, professional learning is absolutely central. What do I mean by professional learning? The process through which professionals improve how they think, judge, and work. Traditionally, if I start talking about learning, people think of trainings that they've been following, certifications that they've done, worst case scenario, online quizzes that they have to complete for compliance reasons. But learning is so much more than that. Learning is in observing how a colleague is handling a difficult conversation. Learning is stumbling across an unexpected outcome and trying to figure out how to do that by asking a colleague. It can happen in the review process, should be happening in the review process, not only during scheduled feedback moments, but in everyday interactions. Learning is something that ideally is happening all the time, and therefore something we can leverage to improve performance all the time as well. This means that learning especially plays a role in an environment that is highly complex. And this is where some distinctions are important to make. For example, distinguishing experience from expertise. Experience is really relevant in predictable, recurring situations. So, chess, for example, mathematics, playing music. However, there are algorithms that are starting to pick up especially those predictable skills quite well. By contrast, expertise means that in a complex environment where the configurations of queues of information changes, I have sufficient knowledge to come to the best possible judgment across a variety of challenges that I might be encountering. So experience can feed into experience, but doesn't do so all the time. We'll learn more about that in a moment. Second, trying to foster quality can happen through compliance, structures, incentives, and that is working brilliantly for the more regulated elements of the audit process. However, we heard in Robert's talk yesterday that it's also all about adaptation. I cannot regulate something that I don't know how it will play out yet. That means I have to be adaptable as a firm in a way that I can draw on the information that is coming in, on the changes, and I can turn those into procedures that are not fixed, but that are flexible and allowing me to perform in a condition of change. So we move from experience and compliance towards expertise and adaptation, and learning is a brilliant lens of which to look at this process through. I began my research with the question why some auditors gain expertise from experience while others plateau. And of course, Mark has just mentioned the classic expertise research that focuses on the knowledge structures that differentiates novices from experts, but also from non-expert experienced practitioners. My interest is in the mechanisms that help us get there. So how do we go from experience to expertise? If we talk about expertise, here I mean the ability to identify relevant signals, interpret evidence appropriately, and consistently form high-quality judgments. And again, consistent is important because we have a variety of cues that are coming in. We have professional judgment, inherent complexity, all of the changes that you were mentioning before. An expert is able to handle that across these kind of challenging situations. We also heard about the importance of theory. And I happen to be a friend of theory, and I'm going to introduce you to one of my favorite ones. And I promise it's going to be okay for the practitioners. It's not going to be a lecture. This theory by Donald Schoen is called the theory of reflective practice, and it differentiates what happens in the professional's brain when we perform a task over and over again versus if we actively learn from that experience. And this theory has two core components. Component number one is called reflection on action. That means before I embark on a task, I will think back. Have I done something similar before? What went well? What is something I definitely don't want to experience again? How am I going to make sure that doesn't happen? What are my resources, the sources of support that I can draw on in the situation? I then go into the experience, having primed myself to learn from that experience. And ideally, I then go on to reflect. And I think, okay, how did that go? Did that go as expected, better, worse, why not? And what am I going to do differently next time? This way, I'm not only going through the motions of performing a task, but I'm actually going to leverage its learning potential by understanding the dynamics behind the task, what drives performance, and how I can best manage. That also means if the task is changing, I give myself enough opportunity to adjust my own knowledge to the demands of the task. This is part one. So reflection on action can be institutionalized, can be structured, can be pre-planned. A lot of you will probably use stand-up meetings. Stand-up meetings are a brilliant way to do reflection on action. There's a second type of reflection in this theory, and that is reflection in action. And this happens every time you are surprised, good or bad, right? Basically, it means it gives you a reason to pause and to consider, wait, what I'm doing right now, is that actually the best course of action? What I see now is not what I've expected. Where does that come from? So it is a spontaneous adjustment of your knowledge that helps you to better cope with the situation that you're dealing with. And this is much harder to structure, right? Because I don't know when you're going to be surprised. You might be surprised at a different moment from you. So it is something that we need to enable people to do so that when the situation arises, they are competent to engage in reflection in action. This could come at any moment during task performance or not at all. If it never happens, that's something we should be talking about. So, based on this theory, the assumption is that professionals who engage in more reflection on action as well as reflection in action over time will build up a different knowledge base from their experience compared to people who just go through the motions. Basically, it's having 20 times the same year of experience or having 20 different years of experience. Those will get you to different places. So one of the first studies that I did in my PhD was a field study where we provided auditors with a case that we co-created with a participating firm that was about bad debt allowance, and we used technology to capture exactly what kind of information people are looking at, in which order, for how long, if they go and compare. So we have a lot of in-depth insight into behaviors. One of the variables that I want to show you now is the ratio of attention that auditors gave to reliable versus unreliable information in that case. The horizontal line is the 1, right, the ratio. Ideally, we want everybody to be above, right? We want focus on the reliable information. It's good to have a look at the unreliable. We want the attention on the reliable information. We have a sample of about 177 people, and those are distributed across staff, senior manager, and partner levels. So this is going to be just a little bit sensitive, but we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. I'm going to ask you to predict how the different ranks were performing on this task. By show of hand, who thinks that partners would have scored the highest, paying more attention to reliable versus unreliable information? Okay, 7. Show of hands, managers. I think that's a statistically significant difference. Seniors, anybody? All right, we have some senior fans, and staff, finally. All right, fewer than the partners, but still there. This is what we found. So, seniors and managers, whoever predicted those, you're doing very well. For those who didn't predict staff, you also did well. For those who didn't predict partners, you also did well. Everybody is kind of close to the boundary, though. So, this is if we just look at rank, nothing else. We then also measured some other things because we like learning, so we measured the degree to which people indicate that they regularly reflect as part of their work. And then the curve changed. Do we have 1 or 2 hypotheses what the curve looked like once we took into account the people that really like reflection? Does the curve go up and flatter? Do we have another hypothesis?
I think people who are very busy, they have no time to reflect. So I think that team staff little time to reflect. And partners more time.
So you would expect a bigger effect for the partners. All right. So we have a general positive effect expected over there, and it might affect people that are less busy, and we can discuss that in the break a bit more. What we found is the following. And this is work that I've done with Roger Meeuwis and Wim Gijselaars, who many of you know, who were my promoters. We found that for managers and partners, the interaction between experience and ongoing reflection at work translated into or correlates with more skeptical information search. We can't claim causality because we didn't manipulate either of those things, we observed, but it is a pattern that is quite robust with effect sizes that as a behavioral researcher make me happy. So, from this study, we found that for experienced auditors, ongoing reflection on experience is a good thing. From an additional study, we found that some experiences are more learn-worthy than others. We found that people that had experienced fraud before, that had experienced cases of earnings management, unexpected client behavior, and were reflecting, actually outperformed everybody else. So not all experiences are created equal. If you have critical experiences, reflection becomes even more important. Now, of course, we're wondering, what about the early career researchers, right? Can we help them? If reflection, spontaneous reflection is not helping them, it might be because they're busy, it might have other reasons. Are there ways we can help them to use reflection productively? And we did a few studies on this, where fortunately I have good news for you. Yes, we can help early career researchers, auditors reflect, and that translates into better performance as well. In work with our PhD, Laura Smeets, we found that giving developmental feedback designed to help a junior colleague learn in the coaching process and the review process makes a significant difference in the performance of those younger auditors. That means that the feedback shouldn't be, yeah, looks good, or I'll handle it, but it is making explicit why performance, where it's coming from, what to do about it. And that can be really efficient and small. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but the intention behind the feedback given is a different one if it's for managing performance or for managing learning. Additionally, we work with our postdoc, Jandre Jansen van Rensburg. We have looked at interventions targeted at younger auditors. For example, before action reviews, which are classic examples of reflection on action, but also reflection in action interventions. And we found that specifically staff and senior auditors benefit from structured reflection that is prompted and that guides the direction in which their reflection should take place. meaning that their knowledge is still developing, but with a bit of scaffolding, we can nudge them in their thinking in the right direction. So overall, we find that for early career auditors, structured reflections and interventions seem to be more promising, while for experienced auditors, we need the right working conditions for that ongoing learning to occur. And I'm foreshadowing some work here that we did with Anna and our PhD Oscar, but also work with Ken Trotman. So if I look back at the first set of studies that I've done on why some auditors gain expertise from experience while others plateau, my tentative answer for now is developing expertise is driven by reflecting on meaningful experiences. And keep that in mind because that becomes important in just a little bit. More recently then, I've looked at a different question, and that is why are some firms better at learning from errors than others? With the assumption that for individual level learning to happen, for team level learning to happen, we need to have a work environment in which learning is supported and enabled. And to that end, I've looked at the concept of learning culture. That is a work environment in which people are encouraged, supported, and expected to continuously improve. And that is a shared view. It is not one manager who encourages you to ask questions and another one is bothered. It is not one partner making sure that after an error occurs, you start to discuss and another one is going to punish you. It is a shared understanding within the firm. This is how we do our work and how learning can be part of that. And there's a wonderful theory that says why we should be paying attention to culture. And this is another favorite of mine. This is work by Chris Argyris, who says that the results, what we do, are the result of what we do, strategies, techniques, procedures, all of those things. But those in turn are derived from our assumptions, why we think that the world is how it is, and that's how we organize our work. If our results are not what we want them to be, an easy way out is to look at our strategies and techniques and to say, well, maybe somebody wasn't paying attention, maybe somebody wasn't implementing our strategies or techniques well enough. And that is where we get into the whole blame area if we talk about learning from errors, as Diane and Marie-Laure presented yesterday. That is great if that is indeed the problem. However, in most cases, because of uncertainty and complexity, it's not going to be inattention or somebody who doesn't want to perform well. The causes for errors might lie a bit deeper. And therefore, we also need to dig deeper in to understand where it's coming from. And this is where double loop learning is coming from, which means we go back to the assumptions. What do we think about the world we operate in? What do we currently understand that might not be correct? And therefore, how do we need to adjust our assumptions in order to get better procedures, better ways of doing our work? And that will get us better results as well. This aligns with error management, where it's not about blaming people, but it's all about understanding through root cause analysis, for example, where structural reasons for errors and problems are residing, and therefore how those structures can be addressed sustainably. I see some people nodding, so this seems to resonate. That's very good. We return back to this wonderful study. In a paper that we published in AOS with Ken last year, we explored what learning culture does to this setting. We split this sample, so this is the overall score that you see. We split this sample into people who score below the median on the perceived learning culture they work in and people who score above the median of that perceived learning culture. What do you think happens if the culture is perceived not to be extremely supportive of learning? Is this curve going up, down? Who is more affected? Do we have one or two hypotheses? More like a triangle thing? Oh, it's very light indeed. So remember, we had on this screen, I can still see it. The staff was scoring rather low, right? Then seniors were doing quite well, managers were doing well, and then partners were dipping just below the line. That was the previous one that you've seen before. Now, what happens to this graph if we take into account those auditors that said, in my environment, learning not that much of a thing? I see some, I'm going to give it away. Not great specifically at the manager and partner level. However, I also have good news. If we look at the group that said, in my organization, we are actually all about learning and that is consistent and it's really supported. we find significant differences again at the manager and partner level. We did some follow-up interviews to understand why those ranks and not the younger people in the organization. We have several hypotheses why this pattern might be the case. One is in line with the theory that I showed you. If I am in an environment that encourages learning over time, I will have learned more from the experiences that I gathered, and I therefore will have a better knowledge base that enables performance. Another one is that the behaviors that constitute learning, asking why, challenging, asking for more information, taking a different perspective, also overlap with professional skepticism. So a learning culture might also foster skepticism and vice versa. Or it might be the amount of autonomy you have in your work and how you express what you find important. So if I have more autonomy over my work and I value learning, I'm somebody who can be an advocate for that and a role model. And that might be more the case at higher ranks. In addition to this, we found that learning culture next to skeptical information search has a host of other benefits. For example, in a learning culture, giving this important developmental feedback that we saw mattered for young auditors is much more likely to be given because it is consistent with the organizational values. We also found that a learning culture can decrease turnover behavior. We tracked people across 6 years. We basically stalked them on LinkedIn. And we used methods reserved for medicine to predict how quickly you die from a disease, to see if we can predict turnover behavior based on people's perceptions of their learning culture and how much they value learning. And we found that that match is extremely important. Basically, I'm 50% sure if you're going to leave, yes or no, if I know how you feel about your learning environment and how you value learning. That's, by my standards in my field, that's a lot, right? That means if you have a learning culture, you are retaining the people that like to learn. And if you don't, you don't, and you do with that information what you need to do. If we look at error management culture, which is a specific subset of learning cultures because it focuses on a specific learning trigger, we find that having a culture for learning actually encourages the behavior of learning from errors, reporting errors, asking for analysis, sharing, understanding, and therefore doing better later. We also find that error management culture sustains learning once auditors are emotionally distressed and or are under time pressure as they make a mistake or discover their mistake. So it acts as a little bit of a buffer against some of the more situational factors that might hamper learning. And as you heard yesterday in the presentation by Diane and Marie-Laure, we also know that it relates to help-seeking behavior and that it interacts with personality. So I have a host of wonderful co-authors that I've worked on these studies with that I would like to explicitly acknowledge here as well. Now, all of this seems pretty straightforward, right? Why are some firms better at learning from errors than others? Here, the answer seems to be a firm culture that enables and rewards learning fosters adaptive performance, which is what Robert has demanded of firms to develop. However, we're never done. That's the beauty of learning, right? It never ends. So I have a lot of questions for future research, and I hope that after this presentation we can have some really insightful conversations of what that looks like from a practice perspective, but also what we can do as researchers to help. And this is, what is the role of learning when auditing becomes more automated? We have already looked at how learning can be used as a strategic tool in firms at the individual level, also at the firm level. I would like to squeeze in one more. We presented our research on team learning earlier at, I think 2 years ago it was, at the FAR. And there's another presentation coming up tomorrow at ISAR for those who will be there. At all of those levels, automation will mean change and therefore will mean a specific role for learning. At the individual level, I'm currently looking at the question, what if tasks underlying meaningful experiences are automated? Where is the expertise, the future expertise of young auditors coming from? We have socialized auditors for years and years and years and years by conducting routine tasks and then slowly building up the complexity of tasks. If a lot of those tasks can be more efficiently done by AI, offshoring, whichever, it is removing those tasks from the learning opportunity for younger professionals. You can react to that by hiring fewer people and thinking, well, it's going to be okay. You still have to consider very explicitly, how do you compensate for that change in expertise development and how do you ensure your talent pipeline? And that's a classic learning and development question. So together with Catherine Cadus, who I think is still here today, there she is, Christian Peters, who's currently following the Dutch football team in the US, and Kyle Broderick, who's currently moving to Indiana. We are going to collect data this summer, graciously funded by the FAR, and together with Peter Eimers, who's sitting in the back, we're supervising a PhD who's looking at how young auditors are learning to interact with LLMs and how to support them in prompting, getting the most out of those tools as they learn to perform tasks. However, at the team level, I'm also really, really curious from a practitioner perspective, what will it mean not to only learn with other humans, but to learn with agents? Once we have automated team members in there, what does that do to trust? What does that do to information sharing, to reliance? What does that do to psychological safety? And what does that do to the kind of behaviors that are needed to leverage whatever agents are suggesting with the component of human expertise and professional judgment? And there are some studies outside of auditing, in medicine most of all, that are trying to figure that out. But I think that's a fascinating area to look into research more. If you have ideas, come and find me. Finally, at the firm level, how can firms design for efficiency, reaping the benefits of automation and other technologies, while also encouraging learning by keeping the human in the loop in a meaningful way? Not as an artificial, we need to do this for assurance kind of way, but in a way that enables sustained expertise development over time. Don't only think of the younger auditors for this as well, also think of mid-career and later career auditors who need to significantly reskill, upskill and adjust how they have been working, what they have known, and what they felt was normal. That is a huge demand, especially of people that have an established identity in a profession. So this is something that is not only relevant for younger auditors, but something that concerns everyone in the firm. So I think this is a shared challenge that we can address from a research side, but also from a professional side. And I think this is where Catherine's call comes in. There should be theory informed. It should be based on what practitioners need, and that we as researchers can have a very active role in supporting practice in that. And I hope that this talk, together with all of the others at the FAR conference, can be a great starting point for having very explicit interactions and understanding what we need from each other to move forward together. Thank you very much, and now I'm looking forward to your questions.
All right, thank you, Therese. Questions?
It's a fascinating talk, thank you. I'm curious, and I don't know what the answer is. Perhaps you do. What happens?
I'm sorry, maybe introduce yourself quickly.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Emily Blum from Texas A&M University. I'm curious what happens when firms make learning goals into performance goals, because I'm hearing what you're talking about learning culture, and I can see and envision how that could lead those learning goals to become performance goals. And I'm curious what you think would happen in those contexts.
So there is very strong evidence from performance management studies specifically that say that you have to separate learning from assessment. If I am the teacher who's supposed to coach you in something, but I'm also going to evaluate you later. If I am your reviewer and I'm going to coach you, but I'm also going to evaluate your performance later, I always have a motivation to manage how you are going to see me. And that means that I might perform for you rather than actually learning, or I might be unwilling to take risks. So separating what is something we find normal to do, and we don't sanction specifically the learning-worthy errors, things that happen for the first time, things that are the result of experimentation. That needs to be very much shared. Or we do need an element of accountability, like we discussed yesterday as well with the blame and the open culture. We do need accountability, but at the moment where it makes sense and it doesn't punish somebody who is being brave, taking a leap and exploring, developing knowledge. So from a structural perspective, splitting development from assessment is very important, and that is who is responsible for that, which structures are facilitated around that, and the learning itself can be very informal, very on the go, while the performance assessment will always have to be regulated and predictable.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Gossa from PDOC. I was wondering about the effect you said, reflection towards learning. It's great to reflect, right? And anecdotally, you can say it's nonlinear. Have you looked at like at one point are you reflecting too much? And also, how does that reflect in the study?
So in our studies, we found a linear relationship, but there is research that shows that there's a ceiling effect. That means that after a certain amount of reflection, things can either level off or they can even decrease. Those are studies that mostly deal with anxiety, where it goes into rumination, where you turn from a professional level of reflection into, am I worthy enough to be in this profession? What if this supervisor looks at me? So this is more about the anxiety side of things, where they see a downside also in performance because it paralyzes you. But I think if you are on a professional level and you're able to keep it at a task-oriented, content-focused way, it's not about you as a person, it's about how you do the work. I think that is probably a good safeguard to put in place and to pick up on signals that somebody might be overthinking. Right, I think you also had a question.
It was actually, my name is Renske from Deloitte, and I had a comment that was actually follow-up from the previous one about separating learning from performance evaluation. Because if I look at least at Deloitte, and please others, if it's different at other firms, speak up, but especially for the younger people, the ones that you are learning from are the same that are giving your performance evaluations. So that separation, I think in practice, is not that much yet within the firms. And I'm not sure if that could be a reason that you see that the learning from the younger people are in the beginning a bit lower.
The learning is not lower. The responsiveness to the learning culture and to spontaneous reflection is lower. That doesn't mean that people aren't learning. They're learning a lot, right? They're entering the profession. One thing that we saw through interview studies is that probably at that stage the learning is much more structured because you have a senior that is assigned to you that is supposed to help you. If that person's doing a great job, right, then that takes care of a lot of things. But it is a vulnerability that is there. So the expectation is there that you have to learn. There's explicit structures for integrating you in the audit process and building up your experience there. But one thing that we see not just here but also in other organizations is that splitting development from assessment is not efficient. It's not perceived to be efficient. And therefore, ultimately, you're going to choose for efficiency. In a time where learning becomes one of the critical mechanisms to distinguish your performance of your people from others, you might want to rethink that assumption, and that hopefully creates more room for that split.
Anyone in front of me?
No, go ahead.
Okay, George Alexander from Utrecht School of Economics. Therese, wow. What a presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Not only for the ideas, but also for the style of presentation. I loved it. As a teacher who stands in front of students, I enjoy this. Your team should be very proud of you. We enjoy it. It's not a lot that I want to say about the subject because you do an excellent job of analyzing, exploring, and identifying issues that are of relevance. And it's credit to your team, big team. What my personal suggestion is that you have an efficient lab to provide all this analysis, and you have the medicine. What you should be focusing a little bit is to how you quote this medicine to pass it on to not the patients, to the users, because here is the lab. Mm-hmm. Don't miss this important thing and you get excited of discovering new things in medicine, because it's very relevant. Look at what you see and see how you pass the information and advice and help and suggestions of how you operationalize that. Mm-hmm. How the difference of the juniors, seniors, managers, and partners differ into this context. My only quick suggestion is to look at the difference at the incentives, and you see motivation.
George, what is your question? Is there a question?
No, I will tell you at the break.
Okay.
The question was how you explain the difference of the seniors that drops.
Mm-hmm. So the difference is not significant, right? So it might be an artifact of the sample that we have, that there is variation there. One thing about incentives, from a learning perspective, incentives only make sense once people have the ability to act on them. So in German, we have a saying that grass doesn't grow quicker because you pull at it, right? You have to develop the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes first before the incentives can do the job that you're expecting them to do. So for us, one thing needs to be developed for something else to work. And if I might comment on one thing for sharing information on what we find, one of the things that I value about the work that we've done with the audit firms is that we have co-created the instruments, the research questions. That means we immediately talk together what is actually valuable to do. And there's a lot of consultancy work that goes into sharing the findings that we have. So we have a lot of informal conversations, but also reports, presentations, videos, webcasts, all of those things to make sure that we get that notion of learning as something very constructive and helpful in the organizations. And the reception has been really positive, which is really encouraging for our team, also our PhDs that are involved, because it is something that is being taken up and people have questions on. So it's very practical and can be made very practical. Thank you so much for your comment. Yvonne?
Hi, Yvonne from PwC. My question is about, you talked about action structure for reflection can be useful. So my question is, what does that look like? What makes something a reflective model that is useful?
So if we distinguish reflection in action and on action is a bit easier to tackle. Through interviews, we heard that a lot of, especially the larger firms, work with stand-up meetings, where in the beginning of the day you'd say, okay, what are we currently doing? Who is doing what? Who needs help? Those are ways to reflect on, are we on the same page? Who knows what and can help at what moment in time? What are things that might be difficult and we need to anticipate on that? So that is a very useful, structured way of reflection on action. You look back, you look forward, you look back, you look forward. Reflection in action is a bit more difficult. You need to create a learning environment in which people are comfortable to say, wait a minute, I think I lost the plot a bit, or I had something, I don't agree with it, I don't understand, I need some more time. You need to create the environment in teams, a safe environment where people are comfortable speaking up. Based on some findings we presented 2 years ago, one of the Big Fours has implemented a new role for managers where they're able to call a timeout and said, look, our team hasn't talked in a while. We should probably regroup and see what we're doing. What is everybody up to? What are you struggling with? What does that need to look like? So there has been an institutionalized opportunity for reflection in action, which I think is a fantastic practice.
Hi, Catherine Holmstrom from Iowa State University. So I'm working with Christian on a project looking at auditors' use of generative AI and their motivation. I'm also really interested in the topic that you brought up, of course, then of learning in the age of AI. So in this other project, I had come across some interesting research finding that people, when they were collaborating with AI, actually enjoyed the task more, whereas we maybe predicted that they would lose some motivation. Whether that translates into the AI setting, or the auditing setting, I should say, to be determined. But I think part of that is the collaboration. So in this project you're working on with learning in the age of AI, I wonder if you're thinking about whether it's kind of the collaborative environment of generative AI where you are getting some feedback versus some of the other papers looking at AI use where it's more like, here's the output, and there is less of that collaboration.
So we do both. In the project with Christian that we're sharing, we take it as this is the starting point, and then in how much do you rely, too much, too little, based on a literature review that we did, which then fed into the training materials that we prepared for the firms. In the project with Lara and with Peter, who's sitting right behind you, we let young auditors interact with an LLM as they perform the task, and we capture everything. So their chats, their responses, how they follow up on that, but also the interactions with the underlying documentation before they form their final judgment. We also have them reflect on the process. We capture their perceptions of the tool, of the process of working, and the perceived ownership of the resulting judgment. So there we have probably too much data, but that's a problem for future Lara to figure out, where we can see specifically the interactions and the dynamics that can occur, because I also think that there's a lot of potential there. So I'm happy to hear you're also doing research on that from a motivational side. Yes.
Hi, Jade from Gerald Edelman. We're a firm based in the UK. My question is on the poorer learning culture, specifically where Tales off on qualified staff. And I guess my question or thought is around, is this the continuous professional development model that sort of CPD that you do post-qualification, is that not effective because it's essentially sustaining self and not the profession, because there's no sort of investment from a legacy point of view back into the profession, where that qualified staff is then nurturing and training the more junior staff?
So there's two forces here. There is continuing professional development, which is providing input from the outside, right? And then you hope that people carry that into their practice. There's a countervailing force that is socialization. That is how we've been brought up to do things. And if you stick with a certain firm, you either agree with that or you have adapted to it. So you're more likely to propagate whatever you have learned before. We know from research on formal versus informal learning that informal wins every single time. That means that if I try to inject something from the outside, if it clashes with your socialization, unless you have a powerful role model who is creating room, it's not going to work. So the transfer from those trainings to practice will be limited unless it matches with the environment that you're in. And socialization will win every time. The good thing is socialization and culture changes. It just takes a little while. Thank you. Yes, Chris.
Chris Hong, University of Alabama. Your presentation prompted a lot of thinking, so thank you. In the points that you made about reflecting on experiences, I noticed that it often said, or it always said, reflecting on meaningful experiences. And what is meant by meaningful? My thinking is that more inexperienced auditors don't know when an experience or, when it matters or doesn't matter.
So that's one of the things we don't always, sometimes in hindsight, we see from, oh, this would have been a good moment too, right? But we might not know in the moment. The notion that we use here is this a novel task where you are aware that you are not able to perform it perfectly yet? And that is a moving goalpost, right? If I'm in my first year, I will find experiences meaningful that for somebody who's been there for 5 years is completely mundane. So it is a personal relevance. The issue is that, like we had yesterday about errors as well, the first thing is awareness. If I'm not aware that I'm not doing something well, I'm not going to learn, right? Even if I reflect, my assumption is that everything is great, unless I get feedback from the outside. So this is where the learning culture comes in. This is where the developmental feedback is coming in, and why we think the guidance particularly important for younger auditors, that you steer their thinking in a certain way. What happens at the higher ranks is that ideally you have developed the expertise to recognize, at least when you might be in trouble, even if you're not sure, that you develop like a system one gut feeling kind of thing from, ooh, this could be tricky, right? But that is the result of years of learning beforehand, and things become more murky as we go on because of the level of complexity.
Thank you so much, Therese. We're out of time.
Thank you so much.
I'm just up here to announce the break. So we will have a 30-minute break. Please be back at 10:45 for our next and final session. Enjoy your break.